Hey guys, welcome to Read It Again online author series. Today we're talking to Daren Wang. Hi Daren, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Hi everyone.
Hi. So we had Daren was actually one of the first authors that we had an event with in our store a few years ago when we started doing events, and he was a huge hit. He's got great stories about history, where he grew up, and we read his book, Northern Lights of Hidden Fires. And I got to say, I love this book. So I got really excited when I was like, oh, I am contacting every author I know in my Rolodex. And I was like, I got to get Daren on because he is just a great speaker. Anyway, so hi.
Hey, I'm really happy to be here.
So let's see here. I'll do a little introduction. Daren was born in Buffalo, New York, and he moved to Atlanta in 1989. He's the founding executive director of the AJC Decatur Book Festival, now in its, is it 12th year?
This will be the 15th if they manage to get one together. It's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, we'll see. You need to update your bio because it says 12. Okay, so Hidden Light in Northern Fires is his first novel, and he's currently serves as the executive director of Air Serenbe. Serenbe. I don't know why I can't get that right. The Artist in Residence program in Serenbe, Georgia. So hi, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks. I'm glad to be here. This is it's a lot of fun. I'm a bit rusty. I haven't had many conversations about the book of late.
The book. Okay, so can you give us a little introduction about the book, a little background? But okay, save the background. Tell us about the book first, and then we'll go into background.
Okay, so the book is a story of essentially of Mary Willis, who was an abolitionist. There's my book. It suddenly distracted me. It was Mary Willis was an abolitionist and ran an underground railroad station in Townline, New York. There she is, and the book is the story of her and of Joe, a runaway slave that is heading for Canada. Townline, New York is about 15 miles from the Canadian border, and I think that's the heart and soul of it. And the really wacky part of this is that Townline, New York, is the only place north of the Mason-Dixon to secede from the Union. It seceded in December of 1861, and it did not rejoin until 1946. Almost 47 years, but not quite.
So that's one of those things that real life is stranger than fiction. That's true. They really did succeed from the Union in New York by Canada.
Yeah, 15 miles from Canada. I've somebody once told me. A friend of mine who's an author said, before I started out on tour, he said, you should think of something that you can sign the book when somebody asks you to sign the book that you don't know, a dedication you can put in there. And I almost always write, all the weird stuff is true. And that's the thing, right? If you're going to write a novel, a historical novel like this, historical fiction, all the weird stuff has got to be true. All the if somebody falls in love with somebody, or if somebody shoots or kills somebody, you can make that stuff up. Nobody argues with that. Nobody says, I don't, that's not historically accurate, unless, you have a famous person getting, killed. But if you have fictional characters, you can do whatever the heck you want with that.
So you came up with this because you grew up in the town, right?
So what happened was I moved. My parents moved us to Townline when I was 5 years old. We moved into this, and we moved into. We didn't know what we were getting into at the time. It was we moved into a converted barn, a half-converted barn. We bought this big property, and the front house we rented out. That was it was very old, and the barn was as well. we rented the front house out to a bunch of school teachers, this rotating crop of school teachers. And the house we lived in was a half converted barn. You'd walk in the front door, and there was a swimming pool to your right. I mean, indoor swimming pool right through the entrance. But and then if you went upstairs, there was a basketball court, because it was it was completely unfinished up there. And my downstairs was the dirt floors. Just a couple of rooms on the main floor had been finished, and my parents built that out, and we grew up there. The front house. Meanwhile, all the school teachers would keep telling us that the front house was haunted, and we never. This is the 70s, of course, so it's hard to say. There might have been some illicit substances floating around at the time, but we'd always hear that it was haunted, and it was an amazing place to grow up. So we would go into the basement of the front house, and we were allowed to play in that space because it was common, but it was a common space for the two apartments in the house. But and down in the basement, you go down the stairs and turn to your right, and there's a tunnel dug in the side of the wall. Right, that's the house.
Yeah.
That's when we owned it, the porch was gone. That large front porch was there was not there, but so there was this 6 foot deep tunnel dug into the wall of the house, and then you go back up the stairs, and there's a rope hanging from the ceiling, and you grab the rope, and there was a 300-pound brass bell hanging in a belfry on the roof of the house, and you could hear it for miles. Mm-hmm. So it was an odd place, right? And we always heard stories that the house had been part of the Underground Railroad, and the hole in the basement certainly made you think that. But I've always said in the South, if you have a house that's 150 years old, they'll tell you that somewhere behind it, Grandma Silver is buried. But in the North, particularly Western New York, if you have a 150-year-old house, they'll tell you it was part of the Underground Railroad. And you give similar credence to both of them, I think. Of course, I mean, this is all when I was a teenager. Or younger, we moved in when I was 5. But these things didn't really mean that much to me. But later on, of course, the story of Town Line having seceded was, that was central to the story of the place. It's a very little town. The secession vote was, 80 to 22 or something like that. But that was well known. If you went to the only civic organization of the volunteer fire department, and their patch said "Last of the Rebels," 1861 to 1946, across or 1865 to 1946. They even had the year wrong, but no, they didn't have a copy editor. So that's the environment I grew up in, and we'd hear these stories. But it was only later, many years later, that I happened across a oral history of the Willis family, and found the true story of the people that built the house and the barn. And I had never even heard the name Willis when I lived there. Somebody had told me a whole different story that was clearly not true. But so once I found that history, that real history, I became obsessed both with the history of the family and with the history of Town Line and of Western New York. And I spent years just constantly researching and focusing on the stuff. It was, and after a decade or so, out popped the novel.
So you were a journalist before you were an author.
Right. To some degree, I was a producer for public radio programming. So and I did some writing, and I've written for the AJC and Paste Magazine, 5 Points, and stuff like that. I've always had an affinity to writers. One of the in 1996, I was working for a newsletter publishing company, and I was really unhappy, and I wanted. I had done one little project for public radio years before, and I wanted to. I wanted to quit my job and do public radio again. So I wrote up a proposal for a 13-part series for Southern writers, and I'm going to mention a bad word here, but they weren't so bad at the time. I sent the letter to a guy who had started a bookstore in his garage, an online bookstore in his garage in Seattle, and I called him. I called him a couple weeks later, and his assistant said, "Mr. Bezos passed that on to marketing." And I called marketing, and I got a contract. They funded my first public radio series. I drove around the South and interviewed authors for 2 years. I was the last person to interview James Dickey before he died.
Wow.
I became good friends with like Reynolds Price and Charles Frazier, and spent a lot of time with Larry Brown, but it was kind of an introduction to. It was my introduction to the South. That's how I became a Southerner and kept my Yankee roots at the same time.
Northern transplant. So how did the Decatur Book Festival come about?
So I had been doing a public radio series in the early aughts called the Spoken Word, where we were recording author events throughout the country and putting them on public radio. And I went to South Carolina, the South Carolina Book Festival, and Columbia, South Carolina, and absolutely loved it. And I was there with a guy named Mark Fitton, who's also an author here in town these days. And we had a great time, and we were driving back from Columbia, and I said, why the hell is there not a book festival in Atlanta, Georgia? And we got back into town, and Mark and I called up our friend Tom Bell, and the three of us sat in a coffee shop in Decatur and kind of mapped it out. And then we started reaching out to various organizations and around Atlanta, and we went from there.
That's crazy. And I remember when it started, and I went to Agnes Scott in Decatur, and I wish I'd been there when I was there, because I know the Scotties, they use them as staff members for the event. I would have loved that. That's awesome.
Yeah. We had a slew of really great interns that ended up on staff and stuff like that from Agnes Scott. The Scotties are a fierce lot. We always love them, and I believe they just. So I left the festival 2017, I think, and I think they just signed an official kind of arrangement to where they're going to be featuring Agnes Scott interns on a regular basis, kind of an exclusive deal.
Yeah, I always wished. I like living in the suburbs. I do. I really miss Decatur. I really do. And I wanted to be a bookstore in Decatur. And we tried for a while to set that up, because we opened 18 years ago, but we just couldn't see ourselves commuting from here to there. to do a bookstore. We really did. We talked to real estate agents. We saw properties on the Decatur Square, and it's like, no. But the suburbia is great because all the people who work in Atlanta live here, and we have lots of families and a lot of kids, and it works. We've been here 18 years. We expanded. You haven't seen the new store. We expanded. We're double the size we were last time you were here. Yeah.
Congratulations.
We took out a wall, and we moved the kids section to the new building, the new side, which used to be a salon and a fireworks place for a while. So putting a fireworks store right next to a bookstore, great idea. Great idea.
I'm glad you got that cleared out. One of the things it's funny. And this is certainly a conversation for a bigger time, for a different time. But one of the knocks I think that suburbia gets, right, is it's white bread, lack of diversity, and everything like that. But if you go to the Atlanta suburbs and you compare them to the population of Decatur, outside of the perimeter is an amazing array of cultures.
We are in
Decatur,
the most diverse county in the state, the most diverse city. So the majority of my customers, they're white and they're Asian, they're Indian, they're Pakistani. It's super diverse, and we love it. Like, we have a really popular ESL book club. So,
really, that's fantastic. Yeah,
and it's a great time. We got interviewed by a big Korean news agency. Well, I didn't, because I don't speak Korean, but Martha Holiday, who's my co-book clubber, she's an English as a second language teacher. She's an ESL teacher in Fulton County, and so they interviewed her, and I'm like, this is so cool. And I watched because I wasn't invited, but it's okay. It's in my store, and that was really cool. So we have a super diverse area, and I love it. I love that my kids are growing up in a diverse area. It's great.
It's really remarkable and lovely, and it just belies that. I'm really fond of Decatur. It's been a great place for me, but that all of those preconceptions have, they just don't apply anymore. So there's OTP's got a whole lot of bunch of stuff going on.
We do. So what you're currently the director of
Air Serenbe.
Thank you. What do you do? Tell us about that.
So Air Serenbe, it's the Artist in Residence program in Serenbe, Georgia, a community. It's about 20 miles south of the Atlanta airport, out on 85. It's a interesting planned community. I think the one way to think about Serenbe is in a shorthand way is if you were to take what might be a golf community and you substitute golf with arts and nature as the focus of the community, and then get really kind of progressive and challenging around architecture, then you would have Serenbe. So one of the programs at Serenbe is the Artist in Residence program, Air Serenbe. And there's a couple of artist cottages where we bring artists on fellowships to the to spend a month or so at a time in the cottages to focus on their work, whether they're composers or dancers or writers, painters, from all across the spectrum of artists to artistic forms, and we pay them a little stipend so that they can just focus on their work, and they're there. They kind of self-isolate in the arts and nature in a lot of ways, but it's a great program, and and that's what I'm doing now. I'm running that, and it feels like a real privilege to be involved.
That's pretty darn cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we should probably get back to the book. So in the book, okay, and this ties up with the history of your home. You talk about Lincoln going across the.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things that, if you grow up in Town Line, New York, 10 miles outside of Buffalo, you kind of think you're growing up in the middle of nowhere, or where it's 40 miles. If you're 15 miles from Buffalo, you think you're 40 miles from nowhere if you're a teenager, right? But what happened when I found this oral history of the Willis family, and I started diving into the history, right? So Nathan Willis leaves Vermont in 1811, and he comes down the Seneca Highway, which is like an 8,000-year-old Indian path heading west. It's now Route 20. It's the road that I grew up on. I had no idea I was living on one of the oldest roads in the world, but I was, right. So he comes west, and he finds a plot of land, claims a plot of land, and starts working with the Senecas. And he builds a sawmill, a barn, a house, and founds the town of Town Line. And in his daughter, in 1858, is that daughter Mary Willis goes to Alfred University, which is only the second school in the country to accept women on a co-ed basis. The first is Oberlin over in Ohio. The second is Alfred. And Alfred's about 60 miles southeast of Town Line. And right, I know none of this growing up, and this is all, and only when I find out Mary Willis's name am I able to kind of dive into find this history. So Mary Willis comes home from Alfred in 1861 in 1858, and starts running an underground railroad station in her father's barn in the middle of a town that secedes from the Union 3 years later. So I always knew that Town Line had seceded, but when I had come south, and I'm working at the book festival, and I was also doing this public radio programming with Southerners. Like I'd sit in James Dickey's living room and interview him, and he'd say, "So tell me about yourself. Where are y'all people from?" And I'd say, that bumper sticker that says "Lee surrendered, but I didn't." That's where I grew up. They didn't rejoin the Union until 1946, and I tell that story, and the writerly question is always why. Why did a town 15 miles from the Canadian border secede from the Union? So, and I never really had an answer for that. So, but I just started diving into it, and I found the end papers of the hardcover, and it's also in the paperback. Is a map of Town Line. I found that map in a rare bookstore in downtown Buffalo, and on the back side of it is was the name of all these people in town and their political affiliations.
That one?
Yeah. So that document, that actually, right? So you can see Nathan Willis is right in the middle of that, and across the bottom is Cayuga Creek, anyway. So and that was the southern border of our land. Beyond that creek had been the Buffalo Creek Indian Reservation,
mm-hmm.
and that I found out that had been sold to what was essentially a a German cult called the Community of True Inspiration. They came over in 1840, and they were something of a commune in essence. They lived and worked together. The children were raised in commune. My favorite story is that when it came time to harvest the fields, they would all the men would line up on one side of the field with scythes, and somebody would beat a drum, and they would sweep through the field in rhythm and harvest the field in 15 minutes as a group. So there was, and that group, they left right at the beginning of the Civil War, and they moved to Amana, Iowa, and they became the Amana Colony, which is kind of a famous cultural institution in Iowa now. And for reasons that are too bizarre to explain, the Amana Radar Range is named after them. That was all in my backyard. But you mentioned Lincoln. One of the most astounding things is, right, so that I went to, I started doing all of this research, and I became obsessed. And my poor wife, she'd come home from work every day, and I'd say, "Did you know that the modern currency was invented in Buffalo, New York in 1861?" She'd say, "Oh, for God's sake, honey, would you?" Every chance I got, I'd go up to New York. I'd go up to Buffalo and go on these research trips. And one time I ended up out in Batavia, New York. I had gone to what's the Holland Land Purchase Office Museum, which is an exciting place. The line was out the door, you can imagine. and I'm walking through the and there's a sign, there's a big poster on the wall for the Lincoln funeral train. Mm-hmm. And it says Alden Wendy Town Line. And suddenly I realized, and I knew that line ran through the Willis farm. Mm-hmm. And I realized that, like, Abraham Lincoln had passed through my farm. And then which is astounding in any form. Then I started doing some research, and it turned out that the Lincoln funeral train had followed the exact same path as the Lincoln inaugural train. And suddenly I had Lincoln passing through my farm, both alive and dead.
Yeah.
And it was at that moment, right, that you say this is so bizarre. This place is so unique that you have to tell its story. And that's the moment that I said, all right, it's mm-hmm. It's time to sit down and write this. And one of the odd things is, if famously, that both the inaugural train and the funeral train, they had intentionally avoided secessionist territory, as you can imagine. So Town Line, New York, right? That the only time that Abraham Lincoln passed secessionist territory was when he rode through the half square mile of Town Line, New York.
That's just a crazy story. So Mary in the book, she goes off to college, and I have to say, Daren writes a really good female character, which is not something you say often about a man writing about a woman, but he really does. Like, when I read it, I could see a woman saying the things that she says. And she goes off to college, and she comes home, and she can't figure out what she wants to do. And
I mean, I have to say about that. I mean,
Yeah.
I think people that there might be a sense of that for a lot of people today, but in Mary's case, right? So this is I mean, she's an abolitionist feminist, right? You have to be a feminist and I interrupted
No, go
a
ahead.
woman to say this, but it's, which is an anti-feminist thing to do, but
Okay, mansplain away. I like it.
Yeah. I think in this context I get to, right? Only in this context. But I mean, she's an abolitionist feminist in a very rural, very non-progressive place and I've oftentimes, as I tried to imagine her, I've tried to imagine what options she had. There was a woman with a college degree in 1858. You've got no options.
Yeah.
There's no way forward, right? And I can imagine the frustration of her frustration, her there's just nothing. Your options are so limited for somebody like that, and especially in that place. So one of the things that I think that kind of recurs in her is this sense of wanting to go, wanting to leave. She's always looking. She loves her father.
Yeah.
And she has this competing interest that she wants to be anywhere else. Anyway. So
but she finds her thing in the Underground Railroad, and in this particular story, you talk about her relationship with one slave, and it was really good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. It was, so Mary is, I have Mary's a good chunk of Mary's biography, and I grew up in her house, but so I have a better sense of her than most people of the characters. But Joe is imagined. There's necessarily no records of any specific runaways as they're passing through.
And in real life she had a large family, but in the book it was just her, right?
Yeah, and one of the things I actually wrote the earliest version of the book. I had her with her 17 siblings. Nathan Willis had 17 children, and they passed through that house. But one of the lessons, the first lessons, or hardest lessons I had as an author, as a writer of fiction, is when you're allowed to throw things out, because it doesn't. Excuse me. As a novelist, you're creating a narrative. You're telling stories. They're not necessarily true stories, or parts of them may not be true too if you're aiming for a larger truth. And Mary, writing about a woman with 17 siblings and trying to name them and
it's too many people.
Yeah, but understanding that as a novelist you can throw them out, you can send them packing, is that's the moment when I kind of gained a lot of freedom and understood what could stay and what could go. I always felt I wanted to pick up Mary. When I picked up Mary, I wanted it to be a moment of truth, accurate to who she was, as best as I could understand. And when I left her, I wanted her to be as close to the biography that I knew of her at that point. But what I put her through in between, I kind of made up.
So, are you a pantser or a plotter? Or a hybrid?
I was a pantser originally, and I will absolutely be a plotter moving forward. I was I mentioned that series on Southern writers that I did, and I spent a lot of time focused on Flannery O'Connor. Obviously, I didn't interview her; she passed away before I was born. But I interviewed her, some of her close friends, and I spent a lot of time kind of focused on her biography. I knew her, somebody that was working on an important biography of her at the time, and she had a profound effect on me. One of the things that Flannery O'Connor famously said is that when the Bible salesman stole Joy Holga's leg in Good Country People, it was as much a surprise to her as it was to anybody else. And I love that idea, right? It served her really well. What I've come to realize is that's a really good idea for short stories. It's a lousy idea for a novelist, because you can, in short story, you back up 5 pages and start again. Novelist, it's going to cost you 100 pages.
So, give me some tips. What were your favorite questions that you like to ask authors when you were interviewing them? Because my favorite question, I'll ask that in a little bit, but
one of the things I even now I always kind of talk to authors about is the music that drives them. Do they listen to music when they write? Can they? Does music inspire them at all? In my case, for example, right, I can tell you that like Peter Case, who's a rock musician, folk singer, who's actually from up that way. His first album, which is Eponymous, echoes the landscape of that area and kind of informs the book in a lot of ways, and flavors it, I guess you'd say, wouldn't it?
Well, the cover of your book is from a song, right? The title of your book?
No. That's Hidden Light of Northern Fires. There's no. I'll tell you that I have a quote from Thoreau at the front page. They asked me if I wanted to put something there. The way the page count was happening, they asked me if I wanted to put something in. The absolutely appropriate quote for that page was freedom's just another word for having nothing left to lose. Everyone thinks Janis Joplin. Of course, Chris Christopherson wrote the line, but it wasn't period specific, so it wasn't period appropriate. Yeah. So, but so even that line and the sense of that song always kind of runs through the novel. Another band that runs through it is a group called Green on Red, which is kind of long disappeared 80s band, but lyrically was kind of hit on something that always meant a lot to me.
So my favorite question is, what did you read growing up?
I read a lot of science fiction growing up and fantasy. Of course, my mother tells how I bought Lord of the Rings at a really young age and went to the store in Eastern Hills Mall in Buffalo, and every time she tells it, I get younger. And I think the last time she told it, I think I was 3.5 years old with the, but I loved all, I was a pretty typical kid. I think at the time I must have read Dune a dozen times, What
do you think about the new movie coming out?
I'm cautiously optimistic. It looks Villeneuve seems like a fantastic director. I think it should be a lot of fun, and they finally have. Right, they're giving it enough time, and they have the technology to make it right. And I think this guy's a good storyteller. He seems to have a real passion for the source material.
Well, I mean, the old movie was just so horrible. It was great. I grew up watching that.
It's
so bad, but it's so good.
What is his name? Kyle MacLachlan. The guy who plays Paul Atreides. Has this long and great career after that, and every time I see him, I just want to punch him in the face because of the movie.
I read that it's the main guy, right? The kid.
Yeah.
Okay, that he hadn't done anything before. The director saw him as like, you need to be in this, and that was the very beginning of his acting career. Was Dune that movie? That Dune.
Yeah.
And I know him from, like, Sex and the City too. That's where I think of him. He was the husband to one of them. I forget which one. Anyway, we were talking about books you read as a kid. So Lord of the Rings and Dune. And I got to say, that's a great list.
Yeah. And Arthur C. Clarke, all the kind of classic sci-fi, I think Arthur C. Clarke he's, it all breaks out, right? But Arthur C. Clarke is hard sci-fi, right? He's really paying attention to science. I loved his stuff. Edgar Rice Burroughs. I didn't do Tarzan. I did John Carter of Mars.
Yeah. Those are great. We've got a really great sci-fi book club here. It's one of my favorites. So and
I should come out. I should drive out and join you.
Yeah, the last book we read was This Is How You Lose the Time War, and it's a novella, and it's poetry. It's so poetic. It's beautifully written. I read it twice in one day because I'm like, I didn't understand the first half first time I read it, so let me read it again. And yeah, twice in one day. It was very good. And I don't know. Next we're reading Middle Game by Shauna. Oh, here, Bernard agrees. Best book club ever.
I'll keep that in mind. Maybe I'll drive out.
You should. It is a little bit of a drive. It is, but it's totally worth it. It's fun. Okay. What are you reading anything right now? I know you said you're writing. Okay, we'll talk about that. What are you reading?
Yeah. Right now I'm reading the Hilary Mantel trilogy. And I have to say, I started it right around the lockdown, when the lockdown started, and I thought, I knew the general idea of it, but I didn't know any of the specifics. And I thought, this is what I need for this is pure escape. It'll feel like pure escapism in this context. And then 150 pages in, everybody starts dying of the plague. I'm like, what the hell?
Did you watch
that? Was badly. What's that?
Did you watch the TV show Wolf Hall?
No. I had none of the background in it at all, right? And I'm just thinking. I mean, I know Hilary Mantel, fantastic writer. Henry VIII, that whole era. I'm like, but I had, I just thought, this is very distant history for me, and now it's not.
Is this during like Cornwall and the independence, the British independence?
Yeah.
It's a pretty violent time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could deal. Violence doesn't bother, but I'm
people dying of a sickness.
Yeah. People dying of plague suddenly doesn't feel like escapism to me.
I love history. I think that's why I liked your book so much, because I spend my free time in the mornings. I get up before my kids and I watch historical documentaries. That's just. I drink a cup of tea and I watch a documentary. So, and I think that's why I was driven to your book so much, because it's a good story. It's a really good story. And then you find out that a lot of it was real, like all the crazy part. So
exactly. Yeah. The fact of the matter is, I think Western New York was the most radical place in the world in the first half of the 19th century. And that seems like an absolutely absurd thing to say right now. But the Erie Canal opened up, and then 1820s, I think. And at that point, everybody that's looking to expand is flowing through Buffalo, and everybody that's looking for the new frontier, literally, they're all, and you get all the crackpots, and you get all the as far as religion is concerned, it was the most radical, certainly one of the most radical places in the world. The two religions that came out of that are best known as the Seventh-day Adventists have their start there, but more famously, Mormonism starts in Palmyra, New York, which is about on the same stretch of highway as 20. It's about 30 miles, 40 miles east. So crazy religion, crazy politics. And I don't mean to say that Mormonism and Seventh-day Adventism is crazy in this context, but all of these, there's all these cults. There's the cult in my backyard that I was mentioning. There's all these different kind of radical religions that are going on, and some of them have evolved into something else. If you look at the early days of Mormonism, you think, "Well, that was a little out there." It was an astounding culture, and for me to understand that was the history, and that was the heritage of the place that I grew up, really changed something in me, because it always, Buffalo has always been the brunt of a lot of jokes.
My family's all from Long Island. Yeah. My best friend is from Buffalo.
Yeah. Well, the famous, there's a famous, in the 70s, Saturday Night Live, Chevy Chase reading a news broadcast on Weekend Update, where he says, the Centers for Disease Control announced that smallpox had been wiped off of the face of the earth. Meanwhile, there was a small outbreak in Buffalo, New York.
So what does Town Line think of your book? Do they like it?
Alden. So Alden is the main town. So Town Line, like, it still doesn't have, if you were to pass through Town Line, you wouldn't notice.
You would notice.
Yeah, I mean, it is a one-stoplight town, and there's one sign, and but I did an event in Alden, which is like, I went to Alden Alden Middle School. That's the and they're I got a good welcome. People were happy. One of the I had a lot of great things happen to me on book tour. I came out and did an event out there. I did all kinds of, I tripped all around, and we went up and did I did an event in Alden, and just before, it was like in February, after the book came out, and I was sitting in a bar, about one of my favorite things to do. I'm sitting at a bar having a drink before the event, and and it was a dive bar. By the way, I talk about history of Buffalo. The first dive bar ever is in Buffalo, New York, and I'll tell you that story if you really want it. So I'm sitting at this, and the custodian from the church next door is having a beer next to me, and we're talking about the weather, and we're just joking around, and he says, "Oh, my name's Bob," and I go, "Oh, I'm Daren." He goes, "Daren Wang?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "You're the book guy." I'm like, holy cow! I just got recognized by the custodian in my hometown. That's all I need.
Your parents still live there?
No, they're. As a matter of fact, I'm going to when I get off of this interview, I'm going to get packed up and go see them. They're up in Murphy, North Carolina.
Love Murphy. Oh my gosh, with the Franklin Campbell Art School
Yeah.
there. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody watching? They have the best arts and crafts festival in the fall, or at least they used to. I don't know what they're going to do it this year. And we really try to go every single year. And my husband, he has a bookstore that he works with up in Murphy too. So yeah. A curiosity shop, I think.
Yeah.
Really nice people. Really nice people. So no, we love Murphy. That's such a beautiful area.
Yeah, it's great. My folks are in an area called Bear Paw, which is right on the lake, and it's a beautiful place. So we're going to go up and socially distance for carefully for a day or so.
That's one of the nice things about Atlanta and like up here in the suburbs. We aren't far. We're like 90 miles from North Carolina. In fact, sometimes it's faster to go to North Carolina than it is to go to the airport, even though the airport is closer. So yeah. So we do a lot of drives where we go up on the weekends, we drive around, and we end up in that area because it's easy and it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's another world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So okay, so you're reading Wolf Hall. Are you working on anything? We talked a little bit about this earlier.
Right, it's hard to focus on.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah.
Right now, it's really hard to I mean, writing a novel for me is a it's a process of kind of high concentration. A lot of research and turn off the router and lock yourself down for a day and just focus on the laptop and on the words on the page. And I just don't have it in me right now.
That's fine. That's fine. So
I'm playing with some screenplays. A couple things floating around on that, but those they're not fraught with any anxiety or expectations or anything, even for myself. So I like experimenting. I like kind of learning something new and playing with a new form, and that feels liberating.
Okay, it's all right. I've heard from authors either say that they are just writing like crazy, or they can't. It's just too much going on, and it's just too stressful. And I get it. So I mean, we're selling a lot of books because people just need to distract.
Yeah. So. Well, that's good. That's good. We pointed out on the Air Serenbe website when it right when this was going down, that what was it? Shakespeare wrote Hamlet or King Lear? Wrote King Lear, I think.
During the plague.
Yeah, during the plague.
Not the plague you were reading about. Well, yeah.
No,
close.
Right, because it didn't that particular plague, it kept coming year after year. It wasn't so I think it is I think it was the same plague. It wasn't the same year.
No, in the same year. It's close though. It's not far. In the grand scheme of things, it's like right next door to each other. Yeah, no. Anyway, so Daren's book is The Hidden Light in Northern Fires. I really would recommend it. In fact, I didn't tell you, I sold a copy right before we started this. And I said, you need to read this. And I'm going to go interview somebody. I interview the author like right now. So go home and watch it and tell us what you think. But I hand sell this book all the time.
Thank you.
Support your local independent bookstore, even if it's not Read It Again, although I would prefer you support Read It Again. Any independent bookstore is great. Request Daren Wang's book, The Hidden Light of Northern Fires, and we do have some in stock. And Daren's close enough that if you want a copy, we can get it autographed. Like, we will make it happen.
I'd be happy to come out and if you've got a stack. And
it's on the way up to visit your parents. You practically right by us.
Exactly. Also, let me throw a little plug in. So we're doing a partnership. I don't think you will not have heard about this yet because we're just putting the bones together. But we're doing a partnership event with the Southern Independent Booksellers Association because although I did work with that guy up in Washington a long time ago, I don't work with him anymore.
No, Seba. I love Seba. I'm a Seba member. Mm-hmm.
So we're working with the Southern Independent Booksellers Association to do we're going to do a panel on the importance of children's literature in the age of COVID. Let me see if I pull up the quick email, right? So it's going to be Samantha Berger, Laurel Snyder, and Jason Reynolds, and we're doing it in partnership with
SEBA,
of course SEBA, but also with Capita, who's a funder for us, and we'll also be working with some local libraries to promote that. So and I think Georgia Humanities is coming on board as well as a partner for that. So
when's that going to happen?
That's going to be June 16th at 4:00.
At 4:00. Okay. I will get the links and I will share it to my Facebook and Instagram and whatever social media ever, and so that you guys can watch. But that sounds really awesome.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, we've been doing some SEBA events and they're great. I love Wanda.
Yeah, I reached out to Linda Marie Barrett, right? Yeah. I love Wanda as well, right? And, just because Linda Marie shows up in my email more often.
Well, she's the new head of SEBA. Yeah. Wanda just retired and then got pulled out of retirement because of COVID. So.
For our own Michael Corleone.
Yeah.
But yeah, so look for that. I'm really excited to be a part of that as well. I'm not. You won't see me on stage. You'll see much more intelligent people than that.
Well, you'll be in the background.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, thank you again. Thank you for watching. Thanks, Daren. This is awesome.
Thank you. Well, let me know when you need some copies signed. I'll come up.
I will, and let me know when you get working on the next book so we can have you back in the store.
Fantastic. All right.
All right.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.